The night she stood up from the table felt louder than the entire restaurant, like the scrape of a chair against her heart. Christmas lights blurred into 1,000 tiny wounds as tears gathered without permission, and for a moment she believed this was how the world would always be now, standing alone in the middle of joy that no longer knew her name. She had come on a Christmas date hoping to remember how to breathe again, but grief had followed her inside and taken a seat across from her, heavy and patient. Before the story carries you any further, pause for a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that find us when we least expect them, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Her name was Eleanor, though most people called her Ellie once, back when the world still felt soft. It had been 3 winters since her husband died, a winter that never seemed to end. He had been the kind of man who remembered how she took her coffee and how she liked the porch light left on at night, a man whose laugh filled rooms and whose absence emptied them. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and sympathy, and then they went back to their lives, leaving Ellie with a house full of echoes. Christmas became the hardest season of all, because every ornament remembered his hands, every song remembered his voice. The invitation to the date had come from a friend, who meant well, a gentle push toward normalcy wrapped in concern. Ellie agreed not because she felt ready, but because she was tired of feeling invisible. She chose a modest dress and a scarf that once belonged to her husband, not realizing until later that she was already halfway gone before she arrived. The restaurant glowed with warmth and laughter, families pressed close together, children tracing sugar on tabletops. It smelled like cinnamon and pine and everywhere. She looked, there were hands entwined, shoulders leaning in. The man she met was kind enough, awkward in the way of someone trying not to offend grief, but the space between them felt enormous, filled with things neither could say. As the evening went on, Ellie felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The tablecloth reminded her of one they owned. The song playing overhead was one her husband used to hum while cooking. She tried to stay present, but memories rose like waves, relentless and cold. When the man excused himself to take a call, the room seemed to close in. She realized then that she was not ready, not tonight, maybe not ever in the way she imagined. Tears slipped free before she could stop them, hot and humiliating. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and fled toward the exit, her heart pounding as if it were being chased. Outside, the cold air hit her face and made the tears burn brighter. She leaned against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself, shaking. She hated herself for crying, for trying, for failing at something as simple as dinner. Christmas music drifted through the door behind her, mocking in its cheer. She felt small, like a woman who had missed the last train home, and was now stranded on a platform that no longer existed. Inside the restaurant, at a table near the window, sat a man named Thomas with his 3 children. The triplets were 7 years old, a blur of winter sweaters and restless energy, their identical faces lit by the candles between them. Thomas had lost his wife 2 years earlier, and though the ache still lived in him, it had learned how to be quieter. The triplets, however, had a way of noticing everything. They noticed the way adults smiled without meaning it, the way sadness clung to people like fog. When they saw Ellie rush past their table, they felt it like a tug in their chests. Thomas was trying to focus on cutting their food when he noticed the sudden stillness. 3 pairs of eyes were fixed on the window, watching a woman cry in the cold. He followed their gaze and felt a familiar ache of recognition. Grief had a shape, and he knew it well. Before he could say anything, the triplets were already sliding off their chairs, moving with the kind of certainty only children possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned fear of awkwardness. Ellie didn't notice them at first. She was too busy trying to pull herself together, telling herself to breathe, to stop being ridiculous. Then she felt a small hand tug at her coat, light but insistent. She looked down, startled, and saw 3 children staring up at her with open concern, their faces serious in a way that made her breath catch. They didn't ask questions. They didn't judge. They simply gestured back toward the warmth inside, toward a table where their father waited, and somehow, without words, conveyed that she didn't have to be alone. Something in Ellie cracked open then, not in pain but in release. She hesitated, every instinct telling her to retreat further into herself. But there was an honesty in those small faces that felt like an invitation she could trust. She wiped her cheeks, nodded faintly, and allowed them to guide her back inside, each one holding onto a piece of her coat, as if anchoring her to the moment. The restaurant felt different when she re-entered, less threatening, more human. Thomas stood as they approached, confusion turning to understanding as he took in Ellie's tear-streaked face and the quiet determination of his children. There was no grand explanation, no awkward apology. There was simply space made at the table, an extra chair pulled close, a glass of water placed gently in front of her. Ellie sat down, her hands trembling, unsure why this simple kindness felt so overwhelming. As the minutes passed, something softened. The triplets resumed their chatter, drawing Ellie into their orbit with stories about school and holiday traditions, their laughter bright and unfiltered. Thomas watched her carefully, noticing the way her shoulders slowly lowered, the way her breathing evened out. He recognized the look in her eyes, the one that flickered between sorrow and gratitude. It mirrored his own reflection from nights not so long ago. Ellie found herself smiling despite herself, the muscles in her face surprised by the movement. She listened more than she spoke, content to be present, to exist without expectation. The man she had come with did not return, but she found she did not care. This table, this strange gathering of wounded hearts and resilient spirits, felt more real than anything else that night. Time moved differently then, stretching and folding in on itself. Plates were cleared, dessert arrived, and Christmas lights outside blinked steadily, as if keeping watch. Ellie shared a little of her story, carefully, not in words but in glances and pauses, in the way she held her scarf when memories surfaced. Thomas didn't press. He understood the language of silence. He offered her a warmth that wasn't romantic or demanding, just human. When the evening drew to a close, Ellie felt a reluctance she hadn't expected. She realized she didn't want to step back into the cold alone. Thomas offered to walk her to her car, the triplets bundled in coats, their hands once again finding hers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and forgiving, transforming the street into something almost magical. They parted without promises. No numbers exchanged in a dramatic moment, no declarations of fate, just a quiet understanding that something meaningful had passed between them. Something neither wanted to rush or define. Ellie drove home with the radio off, the silence no longer oppressive but thoughtful. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel quite as empty when she unlocked the door. Christmas morning came, and Ellie woke with a strange lightness. She made coffee and stood by the window watching the world wake up. Her grief was still there, settled deep, but it felt less like an anchor and more like a scar, tender but survivable. She found herself thinking of the triplets, of Thomas, of the way kindness had found her when she had been certain she was beyond its reach. Weeks passed and life continued in its uneven way. Then one afternoon, Ellie ran into Thomas at the grocery store. The recognition was instant, followed by a shy smile. This time they talked a little longer, about ordinary things, about healing and patience. They began to meet for coffee, sometimes with the children, sometimes just the two of them. There was no rush, no pressure to fill the spaces with anything other than honesty. Ellie learned that love could be rebuilt not by replacing what was lost, but by honoring it while making room for something new. She learned that her heart, though bruised, was still capable of warmth. The triplets became a gentle presence in her life, reminders that joy could be loud and messy and still safe. Thomas became a companion in grief and hope, someone who understood the balance between remembering and moving forward. As another Christmas approached, Ellie found herself standing in the same restaurant, this time by choice. The lights were just as bright, the music just as familiar, but she felt different. She wasn't waiting for something to hurt her. She was present, grounded, open. Across the table, Thomas smiled, and the triplets waved at the waiter, already planning dessert. Just before this story ends, take a moment to comment below and share what this moment of kindness meant to you, or who you would have invited back inside from the cold if you had the chance. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in our loneliest moments we are still seen, please like the video, share it, and let us know in the comments. Your engagement tells us these stories matter, and it helps them reach others who may be standing outside in the cold. waiting for a small hand to pull them back into the light. Ellie looked around the table, at the life unfolding before her, and felt gratitude settle where despair once lived. She understood now that miracles didn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they came as three small faces, a quiet chair pulled close, and the simple, life-changing act of being invited to sit down and stay.